So we're going to be going over my entire applied statistics degree at Penn State in, 12 minutes. I'm not sure exactly how long this is supposed to take. Now, especially since a lot of people want to get into data science, statistics is an option for those people. And I really want this to be a resource that people can come to and look at what goes into a statistics degree. Now, before we begin, my first and second year are going to be a little bit strange because I switched my majors a lot. I went from nursing to MIS to math to actuarial science to statistics. So keep that in mind as we're going through the first couple of years. So I spent my first year at a branch campus of Penn State, not the main campus. But here's the classes I took in my first semester. The first one was Bio 129, and this is mammalian anatomy. So my first semester, like I said, I was in nursing, and this was an anatomy class. And this class was great for one reason. It made me realize that nursing was not for me. Anatomy sucked. We dissected cats, and it was disgusting. And I never want to do it again. So that's what made me switch from nursing. Another class I took was an Intro to Human Development class, which was actually really interesting. The professor was a little wonky, a little weird, but the class itself was actually pretty interesting, and I only skipped it like 6 times. So, yeah, that was human development. And then I also wanted to get my health credits out of the way, so I took a strength training class. I had to get up at like 8 in the morning just to go up to campus to lift, which actually wasn't a bad thing. It forced me out of bed, which really I kind of need sometimes. And then the other main class I took that first semester was trigonometry. Now you might be asking, why are you taking trigonometry as a stats student? Don't you think you would have taken that in high school and been fine? Well, the answer is yes. I took calculus in high school and I would have been fine with taking calculus in college, but I had to take a math class and I thought I was going to be in nursing, so I took trig because I thought that would be an easy option. And in reality, it just set me back about a semester. So yeah, don't do that. And then finally, rounding off my first semester of my first year, I took a first year seminar class that was geared toward nursing. Now, this was just a 1-credit class. We met once a week, and we just talked about what you were going to be doing throughout your 4 years as a nursing major. And this was another class that definitely helped me realize that nursing wasn't for me. I remember specifically one day we came in and we were all doing presentations on what goes into a nursing career. And I remember the one student came up and she was talking about all the challenges that come along with being a nurse. Long hours, stressful work situations, and the fact that you're responsible for somebody's life. And if that goes wrong, you could imagine how hard that could be on somebody. So I just realized maybe, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So after that first semester, I talked with my advisor and I switched my major. Now, at this point, I still didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I talked with my advisor, I talked over what my interests were, and we decided on MIS. And this semester, I will say, was a lot harder than the first one. I was taking a lot more in-depth classes, not a lot of the intro classes, but the first one was Art History 325. Now, as bad as that sounds, it was actually one of the most interesting classes I've taken in my entire college career. We covered periods from like 1860 to 1940, somewhere in that range, but some of the stuff I learned about in that class was actually stuff I still remember today, and I can't say that for, most of my classes in college, but it was actually an interest of mine that was generated by this class. So that was actually pretty cool, and the professor was a really nice guy, and he made it all interesting for us, at least those who actually cared to pay attention. But then also, as required at all Penn State campuses, you have to take an effective speech course. That's exactly what it sounds like. Forcing a bunch of 19, 18, 20-year-old kids into a room and they have to give presentations. Which, for me, I've done that a lot over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. So it wasn't anything outside of my comfort zone. I mean, I still get nervous every time I go in front of a crowd of people and have to talk. But being forced to do it really just sucks. I know you're gonna have to do it for work a lot of the times, especially in technology and business careers. You're gonna have to go in front of people and present to them. So it's important, but the class sucks, and the professor was really, really, really hard at grading. I got a lot of 75s and 80s on my presentations that I thought were perfectly fine. But anyways, that brings us into the next class. That's Econ 104, which is macroeconomics. So this was my first experience with a business class. And macroeconomics is the idea of economics across on a big scale. Rather than looking at a single company and how the finances and economics of that works, It's almost like the economics of an entire country. This class, the professor was interesting to say the least. He was born in Romania, and he had a lot of euphemisms that didn't really make sense. And we started off the class every time by listening to classical music. I didn't really get a lot from that class, but it was cool, I guess. It was interesting. Economics have always interested me, so that was interesting. But then in the second semester, I realized that I had to take a harder math class, and I had to take it soon. So I took it this second semester in my first year, and that was Math 140, which is Calculus 1. Now, Calculus 1 actually was a really important class for me. I realized that I actually kind of enjoyed it, which is kind of sick and twisted, but I did. The professor was great. He's probably the best professor I've had in my entire college career. And he kind of made me realize that maybe a math-related topic would be something that I'd be interested in majoring in. I didn't decide after that semester just to switch right away to math or statistics, but it definitely planted a seed in the back of my brain that maybe this was for me, and I did exceptionally well in it. I probably should have TA'd or graded in that class, but that was Calc 1. And then finally, the last class of my second semester in my first year was MIS 204. Now, this was kind of what my major was, so this was the first introduction to that. And this class was an introduction to business information systems, which basically just means Excel. You learn how to use Excel, and you learn a little bit of the idea about data storage, data warehouses, which is actually something that's really interesting to me now. But at the time, I was like resident sleeper. I was in the back of the class, like falling asleep every day. There was a lot of students in that class, and it was just weird. The professor, it was his first semester teaching as well, so I think that kind of contributed to the fact that the class was a little bit boring. He wanted to get through all the material, and he wasn't exactly sure how to give it to us. But at least I learned how to use Excel, which, I mean, is surprisingly a valuable skill, as stupid as it sounds, because I've actually had to use it quite a bit in jobs and in the future in college as well. So I guess that class was okay. I mean, in this first semester, my grades were excellent. I actually set up my GPA pretty well, which is kind of surprising because I don't really remember it. But anyways, into the second year. In the second year, I was definitely gearing up for math classes because I realized MIS is rather boring. Math is kind of cool. So I loaded up on some math classes, but I was also still taking those business classes because MIS was still an option in my head at the time. So I was still at the branch campus, but the first class that I took was Accounting 211. Now, this was the most boring class that I've ever taken in all of college. Like, incomprehensibly boring. The professor came in every day, just sounded so monotone, and I just couldn't do it. It was so boring. I can't believe people actually go for accounting. No offense, but it was made me want to fall asleep every single day. But that's about it for that class. I got a B in it. I scraped by. The project sucked. The homework sucked. The tests sucked. But then that brings me into the second class that I took that semester, which I thought I was prepared for. And luckily, I had some friends that knew this stuff well. It was Comp Sci 121, Introduction to Programming Technology. Now, this class was based in C++, and at first, it wasn't too bad. You learn Hello World. That's great. I was like, yeah, man, you know what? This stuff's kind of easy. I can't believe this. And then we got into our first project, and I think I got like 50% on it. And then I realized, wait a second, this is a little bit harder than I thought it was going to be. The homeworks were taking me like 10 hours, and I was waiting till the last minute to do them. I just wasn't prepared. So this was the first experience I had in college where I had to late drop a class. So basically what that means is after a certain period and the drop period's over, you have to late drop. It shows up in your transcript, which is why I'm seeing it here right now. But you don't get it doesn't affect your GPA. It just shows up on your transcript that you late dropped the class, which to me isn't a bad thing because I would have got such a bad grade in that class that it would have been an F probably or a D. But I needed a C to pass it for my major. So in the end, I just late dropped it. I did have to end up taking it again, but we'll get into that. Don't you worry. And then the next class I took was Calc 2. So I went right from Calc 1 at the end of the last year to Calc 2 this year. And again, this was another great professor that I had for this class, and I realized that math was definitely what I wanted to do. Calc 2 I thought was almost as easy, or if not easier, than Calc 1 in terms of myself. And I ended up getting an A in it, which was great, and that definitely changed my perspective about math, because up to that point I kind of hated it, but I was starting to realize that was kind of my strong suit. But then the other math class I took that semester was Math 220, which is matrices, a little bit of linear algebra, and that class was actually pretty tough for me, at least the way the professor taught it. I think I'm actually better at matrices now that I've had to just use them a lot, and I've had to deal with them in coding languages and things like that. But the class itself kind of sucked. The professor was from Texas, so he had a cool accent, which was also pretty cool. He was kind of a weird guy. I guess all math professors are kind of weird guys. But it wasn't terrible. I ended up with a B- in that class. And then finally, in my first semester of my second year, I took Intro to Physics, just because I had to take at least one track of a science course. But since I took the anatomy class, I actually only had to take one more science class like that. So I just took Intro to Physics and the easier version, so just using trig identities instead of calculus. Just because I was taking so many other math classes, I didn't want to bog myself down with a physics class that dealt with calculus as well. But this Intro to Physics 1 class, honestly, was easier than the one I took in high school. So I went to class, paid attention, and ended up with an A in that class. And despite the late drop, I actually ended up with pretty good grades this semester as well. Cumulative GPA up to this point was a 3.65, which is actually surprisingly well, especially for some of the mishaps that I had. But at this point, I thought I was doing pretty good, and I was all in on the math train. But I still was thinking in the back of my mind, I wanted to use math for something. I didn't want to just major in math. So my idea was to be an actuarial scientist, major in math, and also take some of those business classes like finance, statistics classes like probability, just so I had that in the back of my mind, because that's a lot of what actuaries deal with. So in the spring semester of my second year in college, which was still at the branch campus, I took Econ 102, which was microeconomics. So this is the opposite of macroeconomics, which I took the year prior. Microeconomics, you're dealing with one singular company looking at the economics of a single company, kind of like corporate finance sort of deal. Which was actually another class that I took that semester, which was corporation finance. Both of these classes, I don't know, they were fine. They weren't hard by any means, but they were just, again, boring. But then anyways, I did round off the calculus track, which was Calculus 3, which is called vector analysis. Now, this was actually very difficult compared to Calc 1 and Calc 2. We were dealing with everything you did in Calc 1 and 2, but it was in 3-dimensional space or 3+ dimensional space rather than just 2-dimensional space. So things get a lot harder and a lot harder to visualize, which is really what helped me through Calc 1 and 2. And then finally, in that spring semester of my second year, I took Stat 200, which was my Introduction to Stats class. Now, in this Introduction to Stats class, we just went over mean, median, mode, z-scores, things like that, the basics of probability distributions. This class was really super easy, but because these classes were so easy, I was pretty upset with myself after the year was over and I got my final grades back. I got a B or B- in every single class, and I think these classes were easier than any of the classes I had taken the 2 semesters prior. So I was a little bit upset with myself. But overall, these classes were fine. But this was my last semester at the branch campus of Penn State before I went to main campus. And it was about 2 years ago to the day, actually. But it was during spring break of this semester that COVID started. And by the time we came back from spring break, we were all online. And I contribute that a little bit to these grades. I don't blame it, because it's really on me. That should have been me to adapt and get used to it. But these classes were actually super difficult coming back to online, especially the math classes, just because of the way math is taught and the way I learn math. I feel like it's very hard to learn it online like that through Zoom, and the teachers were still getting used to it. The students were still getting used to it. So for that, I do blame it a little bit, but it's kind of on me. Fall semester of 2020, this is where I switched to actuarial science, and this is where I headed to Penn State for the first time. And this was kind of in the height of the pandemic, so we were all online for these classes. I started off the fall semester of 2020 with quite a few credits. I was taking 15 at the time. Some of these classes were actually pretty hard. But the first one was super easy. It was all asynchronous, so there was no professor actually teaching to me. I just had to do like quizzes online, readings. And that was Introduction to Sustainable Architecture. This class was really kind of weird. We had to do a presentation at the end, and I didn't know any of the students like until we started that project. I don't really remember this class, but I ended up with an A-, so I guess I did okay. I didn't really take anything from it, and I think that just goes again to that online learning, especially asynchronous. I'm not a big reader when it comes to being forced to read for classes, so I got through the class, but yeah, that's about all I have to say about that one. And then finally, I took the Introduction to Programming class. Again, this time it was called Comp Sci 101, and this one was based in Python. This one I understood a little bit more, and with recitations, which are just like weekly learning sessions, you go in and you practice and you ask questions. I ended up with a B in the class, and it kind of So yeah, we got into different probability distributions and the properties behind them. And honestly, I took so much from this class. The professor was great, and he had just quite a sense of humor. But yeah, that was Stat 414 for the second time. And then the next class was a Gen Ed class that filled a lot of the requirements. It was called the Artistic Universe. Now in this class, we played entirely online. It was a video game, and it was all about astronomy. So you were with this group of people and you were on Mars and you did all these different missions, but you had quizzes and this robot came and quizzed you. Yeah, it sounds super fun, but it wasn't. It was actually super time consuming. I guess I did learn quite a bit about the solar system, but honestly, at a certain point, I was just clicking through and then guessing on the quizzes and retaking them because you could take them unlimited times. So yeah, I ended up with an A- in that class, and I made a pretty cool art project. I drew a Mars rover. Yeah, that's enough about that class. The next class I took was Stat 461, which is Analysis of Variance, or ANOVA. This class was actually, very introductory to ANOVA. ANOVA testing, you're just kind of comparing means. You're comparing maybe proportions. A lot of what we did in this class was in Minitab, which, at least to me, seems like a very academic approach to like using a statistical software. I think it would have been a lot better if we did it in R, because then it actually would be applicable to stuff that we had to do in the future. But the fact that we did everything in Minitab was just kind of, almost seemed childish at that point. I got a good grade in the class. I just thought that there was more that I could have taken from the class than what I did. And then finally, for that semester, I took survey sampling. Now, this was the same professor that I took regression with the semester prior, and she was just awesome again. I learned so much in this class, and I think, honestly, the final project for this class was one of my favorite ones that I've done my entire college career. I had to make a survey for a hypothetical company, and in order to improve their products. You do everything in a way that, was unbiased and would actually benefit the company. And then you also had to do things like find what type of sample and how you would take it, how big the sample would be of people that you're going to give this survey. It was a really cool project, a really cool class. And honestly, I hope I get to use that kind of stuff in my future. I think that would be a very fun career. And it's actually super interesting. So if you're interested in survey sampling, let me know down in the comments. And then before I get into my senior year, which is the year I'm in right now, I just want to mention that if you're taking anything from this video, or if you're learning anything and it's interesting to you what a statistics student does, just go ahead and like this video. But anyways, fall semester 2021. This is the class where this is the year when I realized that actuarial statistics was not for me. I took a lot of the classes that were probability and statistics based. And I like those so much more than my actuarial classes. So I jumped train. Finally, I settled into a major that I actually enjoy. And that's applied statistics. That's what I'm in right now. And all the classes in this semester were geared towards that. I took MIS 301, and that was business analytics. And in this class, again, we kind of expanded on what we learned about Excel in the introduction to MIS class. And we applied them to business settings. So we had a lot of applicable problems for a business and how we can use Excel to solve those. We also learned the basics of data structuring and data warehouses, similar to what we did in the first class, but we actually use SQL and things like that, Microsoft Access. and put that over to Excel to actually work on data from the source, which is actually kind of cool. Then the next class I took, which I should have taken my freshman year because I was trying to catch up on all these stats classes this year, I took Stat 184, which was an introduction to R. Now this class was actually super awesome because it was really an introduction to data science, which is really what I want to do. So we learned how to do that in R. We learned kind of how to structure data, clean data, wrangle data, and then actually work and visualize data, all in R. So that was a super cool class. The professor was like pretty high up in the stats community at Penn State. And I got to talk to him a lot about kind of what I can do in the future and the kind of skills that I can hone to put on my resume. So that professor was super awesome. I love this class. I would take it again in a heartbeat. But then the next class I took was Stat 415. So I knew I was going to have a few hard classes that I had to get through, and this was one of them. Stat 415 was an extension of the Introduction to Probability class, but this was all of the math behind it. Where in Stat 414, you were focused on the concepts. In Stat 415, you were really focused on the engine behind these concepts and the math behind them. So we did the math behind different probability distributions and why they are the way they are. We focused on the math behind hypothesis testing and confidence intervals. It was very intense. Luckily, the professor was very kind in grading. So I ended up with an A in that class, which was actually quite surprising. But I did take quite a bit from this, and I'm glad that I took it. The next class I took was Stat 416, which is stochastic modeling. So this is the math behind any random process and how we can model it. The professor was a grad student, but I think he actually did a great job at teaching the class because he really wanted us to understand the concepts behind stochastic modeling and random processes. And this class was actually surprisingly fun for me. I went in dreading it and how hard it was going to be, but this is another one that I focused heavily on, and I ended up with an A in. So I was pretty proud of myself for those two classes getting an A. But the next class I took was time series analysis. Now this was all done in R, and if you don't know what a time series is, it's anything that's tracked over time at the same time interval, almost like a stock, like the daily ending stock price of a certain company. And what we did here was we just kind of modeled these time series and learned the different types of time series. There's moving average, arch models, Garch models, all these different models. It was a very actually in-depth class that was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. But time series in the end was actually an awesome class because you were able to forecast into the future based on a different time series, and you learned how to get the right measurements and the right type of model to predict using that time series. So it was actually super interesting. That would be another topic that I'd be interested in making a video on, so let me know down in the comments. And then finally, this fall semester, I took a 1-credit course called Introduction to SAS. If you don't know what SAS is, it's like a statistical modeling software, and it's terrible. It seems super outdated. I can't believe that companies still use it. And this class was just as difficult as any of my other classes as a 1-credit class, which really, for me, was a huge time sink, and it sucked because I was taking all these other difficult classes last semester. And honestly, I just hope I never have to use SAS again. But if I do, at least I know how to use it. At least I have a general idea, and I know what to look up if I don't. So that was SAS, and that was my fall semester of 2021. And now finally, that brings me into my last semester. Just kidding, it actually doesn't. I have to take an extra semester because I took nursing my first year. But we'll get into that, don't worry. This semester I'm currently in, I'm taking a class called CAS 283, which is a communications class. This is required for my minor, but it's called Communication and Information Technology. So what we're doing in this class is we're talking all about technology and how people communicate through computers, through phones, through the internet. It's actually quite interesting, and I'm surprised that I like it as much as I do, but it's actually super valuable information. I'm going to be taking another class on this next semester. But then the next class I'm taking this semester is English 202C, which is technical writing. I think this class is actually super important for what I want to do because it's going to be something that I'm going to have to do a lot. I'm going to have to write in a way that technical people need, or non-technical people need to understand as a technical person. So, and what I mean by technical is you're working a lot with different softwares and math, and a lot of people maybe don't, they're not trained in that stuff. So you have to give them a way to show why and how you're doing what you're doing and what it means for the company. So that's a super important class. And we'll see. I hope I do good in it because the professor does seem a little bit harsh on grading, but we'll see. The next class I'm taking is Math 451, which is numerical computations. Basically, I think the general premise of this class is all about how computers do math and how to make computers efficiently do math. So you want to try to minimize the amount of calculations they're doing because that introduces error. At least that's what I'm taking from the class so far. It's kind of a whole new world for me. It seems like the people in this class have a little bit different background than I do, more of a computer science background. So, I mean, I'm going to be fine. I think the class is fine, and I like the professor. So we'll see on that one as well. But then finally, we're getting into Stat 380, which is statistical data science. This is my favorite class by far in all of college that I've taken. So again, we're working in R, but this is a continuation of that Introduction to R class that I took the semester prior. And in this class, we're learning all about data science. We're learning about machine learning. We're learning about AI. We're finally getting into machine learning in this semester, which is super cool. I'm glad that I'm getting to, actually experience some of the stuff that I want to do in the future. And I'm glad that I can kind of expose myself to this stuff. So I know what I need to study on and I know what I need to learn and also transfer it to Python because since this class is all in R, I want to also be able to do that stuff in Python as well. So at least I know what I need to study. All right. And then finally, this is going to be my last semester. I was super excited to find out how many credits I had to take. I was hoping it was enough to make me a full-time student so I still get financial aid and everything. I ended up talking to my advisor. Next semester, I'm taking 7 credits, which is not a full-time student. That's like 5 credits off of being a full-time student. But the classes I have to take are my statistics capstone class, which is a class that mostly seniors take. And you work with a lot of, hands-on projects that you're going to be doing, that you can put on a resume. I'm probably going to be working with a company or maybe even just real-world data and making a project based on that. That's going to take a whole semester to do. I'm not sure if I'm going to be working in a group or just solo, but I'm actually super excited about this class because I really want to beef up that resume and, find my full-time job after I graduate. And then the second class I have to take is CAS 483 or Communications 483. This is a continuation of the class that I'm taking right now, but in this version that we're looking at is going to be effectively using social media and various web design tools. So that's actually going to be super interesting. I'm pretty excited to take that. We're going to learn basic web page skills such as HTML and CSS. So that's actually some skills, that I see on some of the jobs that I have to apply to. So that's going to be great stuff to put on my resume. And I'm actually really excited to take this class. So that's the CAS 483 class. And then finally, rounding off my entire statistics degree, I have to take another gym class. I either am going to do like jogging or basketball. I don't know. I'm not excited about doing it. So let me know down in the comments, what should I take as a gym class? So that's my entire statistics degree. And I don't know, was that like half an hour? I don't know. I'm going to have to edit this down. But anyways, watch this playlist next if you want to see more about my statistics degree. Have a good one, everybody.